Dear class, I hope this finds you well. We've had a ridiculous day here in terms of weather. We've had 70 degrees and we haven't known what to do with it. So here we are back at Shandy Hall, where chaos rules, as always, and some part of the house is concerned with the unfortunate infant who escaped with his life, but escaped with his future, his family jewels, more or less intact. Dr. Slop diagnoses a phimosis in which the foreskin is forever contracted and cannot be retracted. What this means for the future of the boy, the man who is telling us this story, is not specified at this point. So in the kitchen, much work is going on. Dr. Slop has ordered a cataplasm to be made, a compress to be placed on the poor boy's wound, and he and Susanna are going at it like hammer and tongs. They don't agree at all on how he should be treated, but in the parlor they're concerned only with the boy's spiritual and intellectual future, whether he should honor his father and his mother. Walter is anxious to point out that, yes, on the other hand, the father, however, is the principal agent in the manufacturing of this infant. At which point Uncle Toby says, I've lost you now. And Walter makes no attempt to bring Toby into the argument. Toby, whose mind goes totally astray when anything to do with sex is mentioned, he can't cope with it at all. And soon, having decided on how the Decalogue, the Ten Commandments, are to be followed, we move on to a prospect of what's to come for the infant. A leap forwards with just a bit of a shock in a book that has taken, how many pages is it? 360 pages to get to the storyteller's infant stage. But now, oh my gosh, 5 years with a bib under his chin, he's therefore irrelevant as a person. 4 years in traveling from Christ Cross Row to Malachi. That means that's a reference to the cross that's always inscribed on any book which is going to teach you the basics of the alphabet, indeed, of anything, to Malachi, the last book in the Bible. A year and a half in learning to write his own name. I'm not quite sure why he's going to take a year and a half to write his own name, but apparently he is. 4 years at his probations and negations, the fine statue still lying in the middle of the marble block that he is, the fine statue that will be hewn out of him like Michelangelo, chipping away what he always claimed he could see was already there inside the rock, waiting to be let out. And Michelangelo would go to the quarries at Carrara, overlooking the Mediterranean. In fact, on a really fine day from where my parents built a villa, where we spent the summers, you could see the sun would glance off the marble quarry, and you'd see an extraordinarily bright shining light, like an explosion, would reach all the way up to us across 100 miles. And there Michelangelo stood, gazing at the raw marble, inside which he saw imprisoned exactly the statues he was going to carve when he chipped the rest away. And this is the concept here, that nothing must be done, but his tools must be sharpened to hew it out. 'Tis a piteous delay. Was not the great... I've got some music in the background here. Are you hearing it? That's rather exciting. And at the same time, it's totally not what I want to be listening to. No, I'm sorry. I don't seem able to get rid of it, even though I have got rid of everything. might be making that noise. However, alas, no background music anymore. And they are discussing the various famous incidents of people who didn't follow a rigorous schedule like this. The great Julius Scaliger, was he not within an ace of never getting his tools sharpened at all? 44 years old was he before he could manage his Greek. And Peter Damianus, Lord Bishop of Ostia, as all the world knows, could not so much as read when he was of man's estate. And so on they go. But after the year and a half learning to write his own name, they also include 7 long years and more tiptoeing it. It's a bit like tiptoeing it, but it's a sort of all-purpose Greek word at Greek and Latin. 7 long years of Greek and Latin. I did, I guess, much the same. No, I didn't. 5 long years was what was prescribed to the 7-year-olds. We were. I and my fellow boarding school boys torn away from the bosom of their parents. I personally fell away from the bosom of my parents extremely happily, and couldn't wait to get back to school when the term was beginning, and dragged my poor mother to Waterloo Station to catch the train well in advance. I had to be there early. It was terrible for her. She saw with what delight I left the family home, which the family home of movie stars, which I instinctively found rather strange, as it was. And children are not fooled. So here we are, 7 years of ancient Greek and Latin. Well, that should be enough, I guess. Meanwhile, yes, Walter says he continued half reading and half reading from the Tristrapedia that he's written to guide him, and half discoursing, improvising, that there is a northwest passage, the thing that people were always looking for. Henry Hudson, as he sailed up the river here, it's a beautiful view. You can still see it almost exactly as it looked then. He thought he might find the Northwest Passage to China, a way through the obstacle of the continent that seemed to stretch in front of westward travelers, preventing them from getting to China, or obliging them to believe that they'd reached China, which also happened. But there was Hudson on the river that was named after him, looking ever northwards, thinking maybe a little bit further and we'll find the Northwest Passage. The Northwest Passage, therefore, was a kind of shortcut to the intellectual world, says Walter. He's convinced that there is a way through, quicker, a shortcut, that the soul of man has shorter ways of going to work in furnishing itself with knowledge and instruction than we generally take with it. So surely it's much simpler. And the whole thing, said my father in a low voice, depends upon the auxiliary verbs, Mr. Yorick. And he tells us what they are. The auxiliary verbs are am, was, have, had, do, did, make, made, suffer, shall, should, will, would, can, could, owe, ought, used, or is, won't. And with these questions added to them: is it? Was it? Will it be? Would it be? May it be? Might it be? And these again put negatively: is it not? Was it not? Ought it not? Or affirmatively: it is, it was, it ought to be, or chronologically: has it been always? Lately? How long ago? Or hypothetically, if it was not? What would follow? Now, by the right use and application of these, continued my father, in which a child's memory should be exercised, there is no one idea can enter his brain, how barren soever, but a magazine of conceptions and conclusions may be drawn forth from it. A magazine, of course, where arms and explosions are stored rather than interesting print articles. And these are the auxiliaries, and that's already set Trem and Uncle Toby off in the wrong direction, talking about the auxiliaries, the mercenaries who fought so bravely at the siege of Limerick. So there's always a reason why they lose track of themselves. Meanwhile, the cataplasm was ready, but a scruple of decorum had unseasonably rose up in Susanna's conscience about holding the candle while Slop tied it on to the poor infant's penis. Slop had not treated Susanna's distemper with anodynes, and so he hadn't managed to put her worries to bed with sort of feeble conventional excuses, and so a quarrel had ensued betwixt them. Oh, said Slop, casting a glance of undue freedom in Susanna's face as she declined the office of holding the candle. Then I think I know you, madam. You know me, sir? Cried Susanna fastidiously, and with a toss of her head levelled evidently not at his profession, but at the doctor himself. You know me, cried Susanna again. Dr. Slop clapped his finger and his thumb instantly upon his nostrils. Susanna's spleen was ready to burst at it, the stink of her. "'Tis false," said Susanna. Come, Mrs. Modesty," said Slop, not a little elated with the success of his last thrust. "If you won't hold the candle and look, you may hold it and shut your eyes. That's one of your popish shifts." Well, the Roman Catholics always been accused of anything, everything. "'Tis better," said Slop with a nod, "than no shift at all, young woman." "I defy you, sir," cried Susanna, pulling her shift sleeve below her elbow. The shift is the nightgown that she wears. It was almost impossible for two persons to assist each other in a surgical case with a more splenetic cordiality. They were angry, an angry civility. Slop snatched up the cataplasm. Susanna snatched up the candle. "A little this way," said Slop. Susanna, looking one way and rowing another, instantly set fire to Slop's wig, which, being somewhat bushy and unctuous withal, was burnt out before it was well kindled. "You impudent whore!" cried Slop, for what is passion but a wild beast? "You impudent whore!" cried Slop, getting upright with the cataplasm in his hand. "I never was the destruction of anybody's nose," said Susanna, a shrewd thrust. Whatever she'd done, she hadn't crushed the poor boy's nose as Slop had. "Which is more than you can say." "Is it?" cried Slop, throwing the cataplasm in her face. "Yes, it is," cried Susanna, returning the compliment with what was left in the pan. So they're now hurling the cataplasm, which is supposed to be soothing the poor child's wound, at each other. So that's where that's got to. And then, finally, at night, we see the he and she, which we haven't often seen, Mr. and Mrs. Shandy, in bed discussing. Shandy believes in the ancient principle of making a decision by considering it twice, once sober and once drunk. And I think this is the sober version that he engages in discussing with Mrs. Shandy. "We should begin," said my father, turning himself half round in bed and shifting his pillow a little towards my mother's as he opened the debate. "We should begin to think, Mrs. Shandy, of putting this boy into breeches." "We should so," said my mother. "We defer it, my dear," quoth my father, "shamefully." "I think we do, Mr. Shandy," said my mother. "Not but the child looks extremely well," said my father, "in his vests and tunics." "He does look very well in them," replied my mother. "And for that reason it would be almost a sin," added my father, "to take him out of them." "It would so," said my mother. "But indeed he is growing a very tall lad," rejoined my father. "He is